This is a true story. After a dive, 4 divers returned to their boat and realized one person was missing. They quickly called for help. When the rescue team finally located the missing diver underwater, they were shocked to find a knife lodged in his chest. How could someone go missing underwater and end up stabbed? This incident took place in Croatia on the evening of September 10, 2002. 5 people had planned a diving trip, and one of them suggested exploring an underwater cave. However, one person was hesitant, finding it too dangerous. He decided to stay on the boat, while the other 4 equipped their gear and entered the water. They soon found the cave, which had 4 sections: the chimney zone, a shallow area, a passageway, and a deep area. As they ventured down into the chimney zone, they realized it was much larger and deeper than expected. Realizing they didn't have the right equipment for such depths, they decided to turn back. They gave each other a few hand signals and started heading back. Since the area outside the cave was relatively safer, the divers split up to explore individually. Each diver eventually returned to the boat as their oxygen levels dropped, but as time passed, they noticed something strange. Kuklis hadn't returned, and his oxygen should have run out by now. 2 of the more experienced divers equipped fresh oxygen tanks and went back to search for Kuklis. They initially found no trace of him around the cave entrance and returned to the boat. They then secured guide ropes and re-entered the cave, suspecting Kuklis might have ventured back in alone. The guide ropes would help them avoid getting lost in the cave's winding paths. After thoroughly searching the shallow zone and moving toward the deep zone, they became uneasy. The paths were maze-like and dangerous, and with their oxygen supply running low, they decided to return to the boat and call for professional help. On the phone, police advised them to wait for trained divers to arrive. Unfortunately, it wasn't until around 6 a.m. that police arrived, and the 2 officers who responded seemed ill-prepared, even borrowing some equipment from the divers. After an hour, one officer returned with bad news. He hadn't found Kuklis, and he himself had developed decompression sickness from ascending too quickly. The second officer was still underwater, and as his oxygen tank should have been depleted by then, the divers feared the worst. The police sent a more professional team to locate the missing officer. They found him deep in the cave, far from the guide ropes. It appeared he had lost his way after his rope detached, ultimately running out of oxygen. Finally, they found Kuklis at the very bottom of the deep zone, with a knife wound in his chest. His injury didn't seem consistent with drowning, but rather pointed to a homicide. Police detained the 4 remaining divers and interrogated them separately. They also administered lie detector tests, which showed that 2 of the divers had unusual responses to certain questions. However, lie detectors can't be used as conclusive evidence, so these 2 were simply placed under further investigation. Another officer reviewed the dive recorders each diver wore. According to the data from Kuklis's recorder, he initially swam downward and only briefly paused in the chimney zone. Up to that point, his movements matched those of the other 3 divers. However, after they signaled each other to head back, the other 3 divers didn't notice that Kuklis didn't swim back with them. Instead, he continued descending alone, unbeknownst to his companions. He kept swimming downward until he reached approximately 40 meters, at which point his speed slowed. At this depth, it's likely that he was navigating through the passage, searching for a way into the deep zone. Fortunately, he found his way and soon reached the deepest part of the zone. But after reaching this area, he immediately started to swim back. At around 35 meters, however, he began exhibiting strange behavior, oscillating up and down for about half an hour. It was clear that his return was not going smoothly, and the police believe he became disoriented. At this depth, he was likely in the complex passage area. Later, he came to a stop at around 40 meters and remained motionless for about 10 minutes. What he might have been thinking or doing during this time is unknown, but it's certain that it was at this point that he was stabbed. This would explain the sudden downward motion observed afterward. This evidence indicates that Kuklis's death was not caused by the 3 divers who went down with him. Only the person who stayed on the boat didn't have recorded data, as he hadn't entered the water or activated his diving recorder. This raised the question, could he have dived without a recorder, killed Kuklis underwater, and then returned to the boat? However, the investigation revealed that this individual, along with his equipment, showed no signs of having been underwater or in use. Without diving equipment, it would have been impossible for him to reach such depths to harm someone. Some speculated whether someone might have tampered with Kukles's recorder, but forensic analysis showed no signs of deletion or modification on the device. When it was found, the recorder was still securely attached to Kuklas, intact. Additionally, a forensic examination of Kukles's wounds indicated that the angle and direction were consistent with self-inflicted injury. No evidence was found to suggest that any of the other 4 individuals were involved in foul play. As a result, all 4 were released. The final conclusion reached was that with his oxygen supply running low and unable to find an exit, Kuklas likely chose to end his suffering, taking his own life in a moment of despair.